In this lesson video, we're going to talk about something called the no shift. So essentially, we've been dealing with no shift questions from the beginning, and they're not as complicated as the shift questions. But it's important to note that, hey, there is something called a no shift, and sometimes there's certain words, such as likewise, just as, so, which we'll talk about here at the end of this video, and the not only, but also construction that shows us that we're dealing with a sentence that does not shift. So to give you an example of the difference between a not shift and a shift sentence, let's just take some very basic sentence here, starting with in public, she was blank, and at home she also kept to herself. So what's important here is the and. There is no contrast. So in public, she's the same way she's at home. She keeps to herself. She is someone who is reserved, not outgoing or brash, which is speaking your mind in an obnoxious way. Tired doesn't quite fit the context. But of course, the point here is to contrast this no shift sentence here with one that is a shift. And we see the shift here with the word yet. So now we have a contrast between life of the party and what's the opposite of that? Well, at home, she's the opposite of life of the party. She is reserved. So again, the difference between these two sentences may seem very obvious, and it should be. The whole idea of and versus yet or and versus but. Things get a little complicated when you move away from just simple words like this. So, of course, again, the second one is a shift. The first one is a no shift. What's a no shift look like when it's more complicated? Well, boom, there it is. Just as the cultural context of a novel can inform interpretation, so too. So you'll notice this is a construction that we saw there a second ago at the very first slide. It said just as ... so too. And the ... means that there are words that are coming in between the just as and so too. And there, in this case, there's quite a few words. But the point is that this sentence isn't shifting. It's not saying, oh, cultural context of a novel can inform interpretations, but it's not always helpful. That would be a shift. Here it's just saying cultural context of a novel is helpful for interpretations, and it can also, is important here with the historical backdrop. So it can inform interpretations and be helpful or inform historical backdrop. And that's the relationship we should note here. So again, this is just as, so to construction, no shift sentence. You want to follow your basic strategies. Notice what word should go in the blank here should be similar to as informed, because we pick up on this phrase. And therefore, the word that works very nicely here is familiarity. Not ignorance, because that would show that suddenly cultural context of a novel isn't important, that there's been a shift. Words like confusion or answer choice C also don't make sense, nor do apathy, which means you don't care at all. It's important to note that, yes, historical backdrop is important, just as cultural context of a novel is. And finally, we can get rid of D, indulgence. And to be indulgent in something is to treat something kind of excessively fondly, especially when that thing doesn't really deserve that, which doesn't make sense whatsoever in this context. So again, familiarity matches up with the first part very well, and just like that, we have arrived at the answer. So again, this is a warm-up, an intro video. Just the main point should be that you walk away knowing the difference between a no shift and a shift, and some of the less common no shift phrases, such as the one we encountered here, and words like likewise. Okay, in this video lesson, we're going to talk about a special kind of text completion. It is called the cause and effect. Cause and effect text completion. How do we know we're dealing with a cause and effect text completion? Well, we have these keywords here for cause and effect. We have because, which you'll see, in this sentence. Given that, as a result of, since, therefore, consequently, all of these. Get used to them because these are relatively common on the GRE or in the GRE text completion. So, here we have it. Because the corporation has been suffering 4 consecutive years of losses, it is blank to begin hiring again. So, as a result of the company doing bad, I'm just kind of breaking down the sentence here. If I'm looking for the keywords, so has been suffering, it is blank to begin hiring again. Well, it is unlikely that it will begin hiring again. So we get rid of words like eager. Reluctant. If you're reluctant, you're not really willing to do something, so that works pretty well. Inclined is the opposite. Disposed is actually a synonym here for inclined, so we get rid of both of them. Ambivalent means you have mixed feelings. So someone would maybe kind of argue for this word. This word is a little bit more complex. You're both positive and negative here. That wasn't our word, saying, oh, well, they're ambivalent because, they're confident or hopeful in one manner, but kind of unhopeful in another. You see, that's a complex word. It requires a complex clue, not going on there. So, again, key here, of course, is identifying cause and effect sentence with words like because, and then just following the usual steps. Break down the sentence, looking for the key word, and coming up with our own word. So let's try another one. A longer one, as you can see. Cornelius was prone to embellish whenever possible. In some cases, he would even twist reality if it served his theatrical aims. Consequently, therefore, his colleagues did not blank his account of the flying saucer-shaped cloud that followed him all the way from his home to the office. Okay, rather comical one, but there's a lot of verbiage going on here. So he was basically like to exaggerate. That's all that means. And so I'm getting rid of this. This is my cutting through the verbiage up here. So he would twist reality, and therefore his colleagues did not believe his account. That's all. So he's prone to making stuff up. And just like that, we need a word that means believe. And oh, look, there it is. That easy. We noted the word consequently. We went through, we put in our own word, and we got it that quickly. Mistrust, obviously the opposite. The right put down does not work here. Reject his account. They did reject his account, but look at that keyword right there. Not believe. So always make sure we put in our own word. Celebrate doesn't make sense, of course. And there we have an answer. So you can see typically cause and effect sentences aren't the more difficult ones. This one was, of course, very easy. However, there are sometimes difficult text completions, whether single or double, triple blank, that deal with cause and effect structures, such as this one. A theoretical physicist, especially one trying to divine the origins of the universe, I kind of call this a little bit of verbiage, just get rid of it, must rely on mathematical training just as much as, that's actually an interesting construction now that we're here. It doesn't have to do with cause and effect sentences, but the structure, mathematical training just as much as, mathematical training of course being A, just as much as whatever goes in here B, shows that they are equal. So mathematical training is just as important as something else. What is this something else? Notice the word for. It's a small word. It's not big like consequently or therefore, but there it is. That shows that we are dealing with a cause and effect sentence. And so now we want to just do our usual, follow our basic steps, find the clue, keywords, come up with our own word. The mind must be able to concoct, to come up with endless possible scenarios. So to think of all these different possible things. So, is that intuition? Well, we argue that perhaps to come up with these multiple scenarios you need intuition, but it doesn't really mean, in of itself, intuition doesn't mean the ability to concoct or come up with endless possible scenarios. So it's kind of, but not really. Hindsight is a trap here because you're thinking, oh, the origins of the universe, you have to look back. But here you just want a word that means being able to come up with many different ideas. Speaking of which, coming up with many different ideas, there it is. You need to be creative. Logic, another trap answer because math is involved. Oh, math and logic. But again, these are our keywords here. We want to match that up, of course, with the answer. The way you do with creativity, irrationality clearly doesn't work. And there's the answer C. So after a while, when doing these, you'll notice this cause and effect relationship because you'll pick up on these keywords. And of course, it's just a matter of always following the basic steps so you can get the answer correct. Okay, in this video, we are going to be dealing with a type of sentence called elaboration sentences. In elaboration sentences, you will often see here the semicolon. You will sometimes see a dash, and you'll sometimes see a colon. And let's get that right here in front of us. Boom. You'll see these three. I drew them roughly up here. And it's important because these types of text completions are very common on the GRE, so it's important to know that more or less these three are used interchangeably. What are they elaborating? What's going on? Well, David's reputation as a blank was well deserved. Tell us more, elaborate. So we get our semicolon. We have a word like indeed. Indeed is, again, a word that shows us we're going in the same direction. There's no shift, so it's simply elaborating. So note indeed, and then elaborating how? Well, sentence says, even after coming into $1 million inheritance, he, that being David, still lived in a poorly furnished attic. So what kind of word do we need to come up with? Well, this person had all this money, $1 million inheritance, and they still live very poorly. So again, we want to come up with our own word and match, and maybe right off the bat, you know that the word for someone who has a lot of money but doesn't spend even a single penny is a miser. You may, though, have been trapped by the word pauper. A pauper is simply a poor person. David, however, lives like a poor person but is actually rich. So we get rid of that. Clearly not optimistic. Opportunistic, he's not that either. That means I'm trying to always seize the opportunity. And then finally, we have this fun word here, curmudgeon. We don't, of course, need to pick it because curmudgeon, or because we have our answer C, miser, but curmudgeon means somebody who is grumpy. So again, we can get rid of it. But again, we're following the basic steps. Again, though, you want to identify the sentence. Notice, is it shift or no shift? Now, we can have an elaboration sentence, however, that does shift. However, with a word like indeed, it doesn't shift. So that's also important to note. But the idea here is, if you want to know what's the answer to the blank, you look after the semicolon or the colon or the hyphen, and there you will find the elaboration. So let's have a look. There's another one with a hyphen. Carla approached work in a blank manner. How does she approach it? Well, let's read after the hyphen. She would often stare vacantly into nothingness while performing a given task, regarding it as nothing more than a chore. Okay, Well, she obviously doesn't like work, so again, we first looked at the second part of the sentence and thought, how is it defining this? And she doesn't like her work, so what sort of manner? How does she approach work? Well, we come up here with our own word, and it's kind of in a very blah manner or routine. Now, yes, blah is obviously slang, but that's fine. You're coming up with your own word, your own sense. It doesn't have to even really be a dictionary word. If you think, wow, she must have a very blah approach to work or very routine, as though she would rather be doing anything else. So now we can go through the answer choices. And again, here's steadfast, which means loyal. That doesn't mean blah. If you're a steadfast worker, you stick to the task. Roundabout, you're just not direct. Perfunctory, word probably don't know. Unseemly, this is a popular GRE word. It means something that is not appropriate. So it has a very negative connotation as well. So it's almost immoral, it's unseemly, it's improper, but she's simply really out to lunch when it comes to work. Without literally being out to lunch, she's simply treating work in a very blah manner. Then there's brusque. Brusque means rude. So that doesn't work. And you can see the word that we don't know in this case is the answer, which is perfunctory. And perfunctory, when you do something in a perfunctory manner, you go through the motions. You don't really put any thought or heart into it. You simply do it in a very routine fashion. So again, though, the key here was noticing the hyphen, noticing that we're dealing with an elaboration sentence. In this case, there's no shift. We're simply defining the word perfunctory using this example of this woman here at work. Okay, in this video, we're going to be dealing with a sentence where there definitely isn't a shift, and there's a similarity that's important to note. This is called an apposition, where you have two words that are next to each other. In this case, we have pointed, even, blank. And so when you're dealing with these two words that are next to each other, they usually tend to be adjectives. Again, they follow one another. It's called apposition. And, of course, you don't have to know that, but what you do know is that the second word here in the blank itself is going to be similar to pointed, but it's also going to be more extreme because of that word even. Sometimes that word will be there, other times it won't be there. And in that case, pointed, this word here will probably be more of a synonym. But now with even, we're looking for a more extreme word. So let's read the sentence. As she enumerated the current administration's shortcomings, her editorial became pointed, even blank, as it skewered the government for its many ineptitudes. This sentence is a little bit harder than the other one. Part of the reason why is the words. Enumerated. Enumerated means to list out one by one. Again, you don't really have to know this to get the sentence right, because all you really need to know is this word here, pointed. And if a criticism is pointed, it's definitely exact, and it's marked by the person speaking in such a way where they want the other person to know that, hey, you're being criticized. My criticism is pointed, but we want to take it even further. And that's why we need a word that's even more than just overtly critical. We want something like, okay, I am upset with you government full of your ineptitudes and shortcomings. And again, if someone is inept or is filled with ineptitudes, they're no good at what they do. So what's that word? That's a more extreme version of pointed. Well, let's look at muted. Muted, again, of course, we want to make sure here that the words are similar and related. Muted is the opposite. You're quiet in your criticism. Charitable, you're kind. That's definitely the opposite of what's going on as well. Abstract, you're vague. Polemical, mystery word. Uncertain, while she was pointed, she was pretty certain about how she was criticizing her. So we need an even more extreme word. That's not going to work. And again, you see that word you don't know is the answer. A polemic. A polemic is an impassioned, argumentative attack on something, usually. And in this case, the polemical is the adjective form of polemic, or polemics which would be a noun. And here the controversy, of course, is the government and its ineptitudes, and this person is speaking out in a harsh way against the government, and that word is polemical, and that's how the sentence functions. So the good news is if you know this word, you know the apposition, the even, some sort of extreme, you don't have to know all these other words. You really don't even have to know what the sentence is saying. You can still get the answer. So that can definitely be helpful on some of these text completions.